The gavel slammed down with a finality that made Evangeline's stomach lurch. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $50,000. Evangeline Westbrook gripped her purse tighter, her knuckles white as she stared at the auctioneer's podium. The Timber Ridge Community Center had been transformed into something that felt more like a slave market than a charity event, complete with families standing on a makeshift stage while wealthy bidders evaluated them like livestock. She shouldn't be here. 3 months ago, she'd been planning her daughter Melody's 15th birthday party. Now she was about to auction herself and her 5 children to the highest bidder because Vincent Moretti's men had made it clear that hiding wouldn't save them from Dorian's debts. Next item, the auctioneer called out, consulting his clipboard. Lot 14. Evangeline Westbrook, age 29, widowed mother of 5 children ages 6 through 14. Skilled in household management, bookkeeping, and childcare. Seeking long-term domestic arrangement. The words hit her like physical blows. Item. Lot. She forced herself to walk up the 3 steps to the platform, her legs shaking. Behind her, Melody held River's hand while Atlas carried Sage on his back. Iris clung to Melody's other side, her face buried in her sister's jacket. "Mom, I'm scared," Sage whispered. "It's going to be okay, baby," Evangeline managed, though her voice cracked. Nothing about this was okay. But when Moretti's enforcer had cornered her at the grocery store last week, his message had been crystal clear. Pay Dorian's $200,000 debt or watch her children disappear one by one. The bidding started at $5,000. A cattle rancher from outside town raised his paddle. $10,000. 15. 20. Evangeline's heart pounded as the numbers climbed. Each bid represented a different kind of prison, a different way her family would be torn apart. 25,000. Called out a woman in the front row, her smile predatory. Evangeline recognized her as the wife of the town's largest employer. The woman who'd fired her from the diner when word got out about Dorian's gambling debts. 30,000. Came a gravelly voice from the middle section. Evangeline's eyes swept the crowd, desperate to avoid looking at the faces of people who'd once been her neighbors, her friends. People who now saw her as a commodity to be purchased. 40,000. The bidding war continued, each number another nail in the coffin of her dignity. She thought about the phone call that had changed everything. Moretti's voice, smooth as silk but deadly as a blade. "Your husband owed me money, Mrs. Westbrook. A lot of money. And since he can't pay, that debt transfers to you." 50,000. The cattle rancher called out, his voice confident. 60,000. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife. Deep, commanding, and coming from the very back of the room. Evangeline turned toward the sound and froze. A man stood in the shadows near the exit, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Steel gray, intense, and staring directly at her with an expression she couldn't read. 70,000. The cattle rancher countered, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. 100,000. The stranger said, his tone casual, as if he were ordering coffee. The room fell silent. Evangeline's mouth went dry. $100,000. Enough to pay off Dorian's debts and have money left over. Enough to buy her children's safety. "Do I hear 110? The auctioneer asked, his voice pitched higher with excitement. Silence. 100,000 going once. The gavel hovered in the air. Going twice. The stranger stepped forward into the light, and Evangeline's world tilted. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she was seeing a ghost. The same strong jawline, the same broad shoulders, even the same way of standing with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked exactly like Dorian. Sold to Mr. Kieran Ravencrest for $100,000. The gavel came down, sealing her fate. Evangeline's legs nearly gave out. Kieran Ravencrest. She'd heard the name whispered in business circles, read about him in the local paper. Real estate mogul, self-made millionaire, known for his ruthless business tactics and reclusive lifestyle. And he just bought her family. Kieran moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. When he reached the platform, he extended his hand to help her down the steps. His touch was warm, steady, and completely at odds with the coldness in his gray eyes. "Mrs. Westbrook," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We need to talk. Up close." The resemblance to Dorian was even more unsettling. The same height, the same build, but where Dorian had been charming and easygoing, this man radiated controlled power. Danger wrapped in expensive fabric. "My children," she managed, "will be well cared for," he assured her, though his eyes never left her face. "You have my word." The crowd was dispersing now, the evening's entertainment over. Evangeline gathered her children close, their faces pale with confusion and fear. They'd been through so much already, losing their father, their home, their sense of security. Now they were heading into the unknown with a man who looked like their father's ghost. "Mr. Ravencrest," she said, finding her voice. "I need to know what you expect from us." He turned those steel gray eyes on her again, and for a moment, she thought she saw something flicker behind them. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "What I expect, Mrs. Westbrook, is answers, starting with everything you can tell me about your late husband." The way he said it made her skin crawl, like he already knew things about Dorian that she didn't. Like this whole auction hadn't been about charity or impulse, but about something much more deliberate, much more dangerous. "Why?" she whispered. Kieran Ravencrest smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I believe your husband stole something from me. Something I've been looking for my entire life." The black SUV wound through the mountain roads for what felt like hours. Evangeline sat in the front passenger seat, stealing glances at Kieran as he navigated the twisting curves with practiced ease. Behind them, her children huddled together in the spacious back seats, whispering among themselves in voices too low for her to catch. "How much further?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving Timber Ridge. "Another 10 minutes, Kieran replied without taking his eyes off the road. "The estate is isolated. Privacy is important in my line of work." Estate. Not house or home, but estate. The distinction wasn't lost on her. This wasn't a place where people lived normal lives. This was where powerful men conducted business that required absolute secrecy. The trees parted suddenly, revealing a set of imposing iron gates that opened automatically as they approached. Beyond them, a long driveway led to a sprawling mansion that looked like something from a movie set. Stone and timber construction, multiple wings extending in different directions, windows that gleamed like watchful eyes in the gathering dusk. "Welcome to Ravencrest Manor," Kieran said, and there was something in his voice that might have been pride. Or possession. Iris pressed her face to the window. "It's huge, Mom. Like a castle," Sage added, his earlier fear temporarily forgotten in the face of such grandeur. Evangeline's stomach churned. The beauty of the place only made their situation more surreal. How had her life gone from struggling to make rent on a 2-bedroom apartment to living in a mansion that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime? A tall, elderly man in a crisp black suit waited by the front entrance. His posture was military straight, his silver hair perfectly groomed. As they climbed out of the SUV, he stepped forward with a slight bow. "Mrs. Westbrook, children, this is Harrison Millbrook," Kieran said. "He manages the household staff and will help you get settled." Harrison's smile was genuine, reaching his kind brown eyes. "Welcome to Ravencrest Manor. I've prepared rooms for each of you in the East Wing. Dinner will be served in an hour, if that's agreeable." "That's very kind. Thank you," Evangeline managed, trying to process the surreal politeness of it all. She'd expected coldness, commands, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, she was being treated like a guest rather than property. "Before you settle in," Kieran interrupted, "I'd like to show you something." He led them through the front entrance into a foyer that could have housed her entire former apartment. A grand staircase curved upward to the second floor, while hallways branched off in 3 directions. Kieran chose the left corridor, walking with the confident stride of a man who knew every inch of his domain. The hallway was lined with portraits, most of them formal family photos spanning what looked like several generations. Kieran stopped in front of a particular painting near the end of the hall. It showed 2 young boys, perhaps 7 years old, identical except for their clothing. One wore a formal suit, the other casual play clothes. "My brother and me," Kieran said simply. The last photo taken before he disappeared. Evangeline stepped closer, studying the faces. The resemblance to both Kieran and Dorian was unmistakable, but it was the boy in play clothes who made her heart skip. Same mischievous smile, same way of tilting his head slightly to the left. "What happened to him?" Melody asked, speaking for the first time since they'd left the auction. Kieran's jaw tightened. He was kidnapped, taken from our boarding school when we were 7. The authorities searched for months, but they never found a trace. I'm sorry, Evangeline whispered, because what else could she say? She understood loss, understood the way grief could hollow out a person's chest and leave them struggling to breathe. His name was Dante. Kieran continued, his voice carefully controlled. Dante Ravencrest. When I saw you at the auction, when I heard your married name was Westbrook, I thought perhaps. He trailed off, but Evangeline understood. You thought my husband might be your brother. The physical resemblance is remarkable. The age would be exactly right. And the fact that he appeared in Timber Ridge 5 years ago with no family history, no childhood friends. Kieran turned to face her fully. Tell me about how you met Dorian. River shifted uncomfortably beside her. He'd been closest to his father, had inherited Dorian's love of chess and puzzles. Dad said he came from back east. Said his family died in a car accident when he was 18. What else did he tell you about his past? Evangeline felt a chill run down her spine. Not much, actually. He said it was too painful to talk about. He had nightmares sometimes, especially the first year we were married. But when I asked about them, he'd just say it was better to focus on the future. Kieran's eyes sharpened. Nightmares about what? Dark places. Being trapped. Sometimes he'd wake up speaking what sounded like another language. But when I asked him about it, he claimed he didn't remember. What did this other language sound like? Evangeline closed her eyes, trying to remember. Russian, maybe? Or something Eastern European. But that doesn't make sense because he insisted he was born in Maine. Something passed across Kieran's face, too quick to interpret. Show me to your husband's belongings. Anything he left behind. They're still in storage, she said. I couldn't afford to keep the apartment after he died, so I put everything in a unit across town. We'll retrieve them tomorrow. Kieran started walking again, leading them deeper into the mansion. For tonight, you need rest. Harrison will show you to your rooms. Mr. Ravencrest, Evangeline called out, making him pause. Why are you helping us? Even if Dorian was your brother, he's gone now. What do you gain from this? For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Peace, Mrs. Westbrook. After 28 years of searching, I just want peace. He walked away, leaving them standing in the hallway beneath the portrait of 2 7-year-old boys who had no idea their lives were about to be torn apart. Evangeline stared at the painted faces, trying to reconcile the innocent child with the man she'd married. Had Dorian really been Dante Ravencrest? Or was this all an elaborate coincidence? Mom, Sage tugged at her hand. Are we safe here? She looked down at her youngest son, his blue eyes wide with uncertainty. Behind him, her other children waited for her answer. They'd been through so much already, had lost so much. She couldn't promise them safety because she didn't know what Kieran Ravencrest really wanted from them. But she could promise them something else. We're together, she said firmly. Whatever happens, we face it together. Harrison appeared at her elbow, his presence both comforting and discreet. Perhaps we should get the children settled before dinner? The rooms are quite comfortable, and there's a game room on the second floor that I think they might enjoy. As they followed the butler up the grand staircase, Evangeline couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a mystery that had been 28 years in the making. Somewhere in this mansion were answers about her dead husband, answers about the man who'd bought them, and answers about why she felt like she was being watched by ghosts. The storage unit smelled like cardboard and regret. Evangeline stood in the doorway, watching as Kieran examined the boxes that contained the remnants of her marriage. 3 days at Ravencrest Manor had settled her children into a routine that felt almost normal, but this felt like desecrating a grave. This one, Kieran said, opening a box labeled Dorian Personal. His movements were careful, respectful, but his eyes held the intensity of a hunter tracking prey. Inside were the usual artifacts of a man's life. A watch, cufflinks, a leather wallet worn smooth from years of use. But it was what lay beneath that made Kieran go completely still. A silver medallion on a thin chain, tarnished with age. Kieran lifted it with hands that weren't quite steady, turning it over to reveal an intricate engraving on the back. 2 ravens intertwined, their wings forming a perfect circle. Where did he get this? Kieran's voice was barely a whisper. Evangeline stepped closer. He always wore it. Said it was the only thing he had left from his childhood. Why? Do you recognize it? Instead of answering, Kieran reached inside his shirt and pulled out an identical medallion. Same silver, same ravens, same worn chain. These were made for my brother and me on our 6th birthday. Our grandmother had them commissioned from a jeweler in Prague. There were only 2. The storage unit suddenly felt too small, too airless. Evangeline sank onto a nearby box, her mind reeling. That's impossible. Dorian bought that medallion at an antique shop in Portland. He told me the story a dozen times. Did he? Kieran's gray eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. Or did you just assume that's where it came from because that's what made sense? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Had Dorian actually told her he bought it? Or had she filled in the details herself when he deflected her questions about his past? There's more. Kieran was digging deeper into the box, pulling out items she'd packed away without really looking at them. A chess set with pieces carved from what looked like bone. A small leather journal filled with sketches of architectural designs. A photograph of a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. I remember this chess set, Kieran said, his fingers tracing the carved pieces. Dante was always better at chess than me. Drove me crazy because I was older by 6 minutes and thought that should count for something. Dorian taught all the children to play, Evangeline said faintly. River became quite good at it. Kieran set down the chess piece and picked up the photograph. Do you know who this is? Evangeline studied the picture. The woman was beautiful in a haunting way, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge. He said it was his mother, the only picture that survived the car accident. Our mother died when we were 3, Kieran said quietly. This isn't her. The lies were piling up like autumn leaves, each one making it harder to breathe. How many stories had Dorian told her that weren't true? How much of their marriage had been built on fabrication? I don't understand, she said. If Dorian was your brother, why didn't he contact you? Why create a false identity? Why marry me and have children and pretend to be someone else entirely? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying the medallion in his palm. Maybe he couldn't remember. Head trauma, psychological damage from whatever happened to him. Or maybe, he paused, maybe he was running from something. What kind of something? The kind that kills families and steals children in the middle of the night. A chill ran through Evangeline that had nothing to do with the cold storage unit. You think whoever took him was still after him? I think a 7-year-old boy doesn't just disappear without a trace unless someone very powerful wants him gone. And I think whoever that someone is, they might not be finished. Kieran pulled out his phone and made a call. Harrison, I need you to contact Scarlett Thornfield. Tell her I have a case for her. He paused, listening. Yes, I know it's been 3 years since I last used her services. This is different. Who's Scarlett Thornfield? Evangeline asked when he hung up. Private investigator. She specializes in cold cases, missing persons, identity reconstruction. If anyone can trace what happened to Dante after he disappeared, it's her. They spent another hour going through boxes, finding more pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. A leather jacket that still smelled faintly of cologne. Books on architecture and city planning. A collection of vintage postcards from cities around the world, all postmarked years before Dorian would have been old enough to travel. These don't make sense either, Evangeline said, holding up a postcard from Prague dated 15 years ago. Dorian never traveled internationally. He didn't even have a passport. The passport issue is interesting, Kieran mused. It's hard to live a completely fabricated life without proper documentation. Someone helped him create his identity. Or someone forced him to. They loaded the boxes into Kieran's SUV as the sun began to set behind the mountains. The drive back to Ravencrest Manor passed in contemplative silence, both of them lost in thoughts too complex for easy conversation. When they arrived, Harrison met them at the front door with news that made Kieran's jaw tighten. Miss Thornfield is here, sir. She's waiting in your study. Already? I only called her 2 hours ago. She said she was in Portland on another case and could drive up immediately. She seemed quite eager to hear from you again. Kieran's expression darkened. Of course she did. They found Scarlett Thornfield standing by the window in Kieran's study, silhouetted against the last light of day. She was younger than Evangeline had expected, perhaps early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Her black suit was expensive but practical, and when she turned to greet them, her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. Kieran, she said, extending her hand. It's been too long. Scarlett. He shook her hand briefly, then stepped back. This is Evangeline Westbrook. The case involves her late husband. Scarlett's gaze shifted to Evangeline, and she felt suddenly evaluated, cataloged, and filed away for future reference. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. What can you tell me about the circumstances of your husband's death? Evangeline glanced at Kieran, who nodded encouragingly. Car accident 6 months ago. He was driving home from work during a storm, lost control on a curve and hit a tree. Was there an investigation? The police said it was straightforward. Bad weather, slick roads, tragic accident. Scarlett made a note in a small leather notebook. But you have reasons to doubt that official conclusion? We have reasons to doubt everything about Dorian Westbrook's identity, Kieran said. He pulled out the medallion and set it on his desk next to its twin. Starting with this. Scarlett's eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting. Identical pieces? Made for my brother and me when we were 6. There were only 2, and Dante was wearing his when he disappeared 28 years ago. And you believe Dorian Westbrook was actually Dante Ravencrest? The evidence is compelling. Physical resemblance, age, timing, personal artifacts. But we need proof. Scarlett nodded, already mentally organizing the investigation. I'll need access to all of Mr. Westbrook's personal effects, any documentation you have about his background, medical records if possible. I'll also want to examine the accident scene and speak with the investigating officers. Done, Kieran said. What else? Time, Scarlett said simply. And the understanding that what we find might not be what you're hoping for. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we want it to be. As Evangeline listened to them discuss the investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were opening a door that might be better left closed. Her marriage to Dorian had been happy, stable, normal. Did it matter if he'd been someone else before he became her husband? Did it matter if the man she'd loved had been built on lies? But then she thought about her children, about the threats from Moretti's men, about the way Kieran looked at her sometimes like he was seeing a ghost. Nothing in her life was normal anymore. Maybe it was time to stop pretending it ever had been. How long? She asked quietly. Scarlett glanced up from her notes. How long for what, Mrs. Westbrook? How long before we know the truth? Scarlett's smile this time was almost sympathetic. In my experience, Mrs. Westbrook, the truth has a way of revealing itself whether we're ready for it or not. The question isn't how long it will take to find it. The question is whether you're prepared for what we might discover. Looking at the 2 medallions lying side by side on Kieran's desk, Evangeline realized she'd never been prepared for any of this. But ready or not, the truth was coming. Scarlett's investigation moved with the efficiency of a surgical strike. Within 48 hours, she'd transformed the guest room adjacent to Kieran's study into a command center complete with computers, files, and a wall-sized map of the Pacific Northwest marked with colored pins. Evangeline found her there on Thursday morning, surrounded by documents and photographs spread across 3 folding tables. The investigator looked up from a computer screen displaying what appeared to be financial records. Mrs. Westbrook, perfect timing. I have questions about your husband's employment history. What kind of questions? Scarlett gestured to a chair. Dorian worked as an architectural consultant for Morrison & Associates, correct? For 3 years, yes. He specialized in residential developments. The problem is that Morrison & Associates has no record of employing anyone named Dorian Westbrook. Ever. Evangeline felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet. That's impossible. He went to work every day. He brought home paychecks. I saw his business cards. The business cards were professionally made, and the paychecks were real. But they didn't come from Morrison & Associates. Scarlett pulled up a bank statement on her laptop. The deposits to your joint account came from a company called Cascade Holdings. Ever heard of it? No. Neither had I until yesterday. Cascade Holdings is a shell company registered in Delaware. Its only listed asset is a post office box in Seattle. The implications hit Evangeline like a physical blow. You're saying Dorian never actually worked as an architect? I'm saying someone was paying him to pretend to work as an architect. The question is who and why. Kieran appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Any luck with the accident report? That's where things get really interesting, Scarlett said, switching to a different file. The investigating officer was Detective Ray Morrison. Ring any bells? Morrison. Evangeline repeated. Like Morrison and Associates? His brother owns the architectural firm. Bit of a coincidence, don't you think? Kieran's expression darkened. What did the detective have to say? Unfortunately, Detective Morrison died of a heart attack 6 weeks after filing his report on Dorian's accident. At age 34. No previous health issues. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of Scarlett's computers. Evangeline's hands were shaking, so she clasped them tightly in her lap. This is insane. You're talking about conspiracy, murder, cover-ups. Dorian was just a regular guy. He coached Little League, helped with homework, fixed leaky faucets. Was he left-handed or right-handed? Scarlett asked suddenly. Right-handed. Why? Because Dante Ravencrest was left-handed, Kieran said quietly. Aggressively so. Threw tantrums as a child when teachers tried to make him write with his right hand. People can be ambidextrous, Evangeline protested, but her voice lacked conviction. True, Scarlett agreed. But there's something else. I managed to get a copy of the coroner's report from Dorian's accident. He had several old scars that were never properly documented. Cigarette burns on his back, ligature marks on his wrists consistent with long-term restraint, and evidence of multiple broken bones that healed without proper medical treatment. Evangeline's stomach turned. Dorian never smoked. He was terrified of cigarettes. I always thought it was just a health thing, but now you're wondering if he had reason to fear them, Kieran finished. The pattern suggests prolonged captivity and systematic abuse, Scarlett continued. The kind of treatment designed to break someone's will, make them compliant, change their fundamental behaviors. Like forcing a left-handed child to use his right hand, Kieran said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Evangeline closed her eyes, trying to reconcile this new information with her memories of Dorian. Kind, gentle Dorian who woke up screaming from nightmares he claimed not to remember, who flinched when anyone approached him from behind, who never, ever took off his shirt in front of the children. There's more, Scarlett said gently. I found something in the financial records that you need to see. She handed Evangeline a bank statement dated 2 weeks before Dorian's death. Among the usual transactions was a withdrawal for $50,000 in cash. I never knew about this, Evangeline said. $50,000? We didn't have that kind of money. Actually, you did. There were several large deposits in the months leading up to his death. Always cash. Always in amounts just under the federal reporting requirements. Someone was paying him, Kieran said. Or paying him off. A knock at the door interrupted them. Harrison appeared, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. Mr. Ravencrest, there's a delivery for Mrs. Westbrook. The courier insisted it was urgent. Evangeline's blood chilled. I'm not expecting anything. Harrison handed her a plain manila envelope with her name written in block letters. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single photograph and a typewritten note. The photograph showed her children playing in Ravencrest Manor's garden the day before. Someone had been watching them, close enough to capture individual faces in sharp detail. Red circles had been drawn around each child's head. The note was brief. Your husband kept secrets. Some secrets are worth killing for. Others are worth dying for. Choose wisely. Kieran was on his feet before she'd finished reading, already pulling out his phone. Harrison, get the children inside immediately. Lock down the house. No one comes or goes without my authorization. Sir, they're not in the garden anymore. They went for a walk with young River toward the lake. How long ago? Perhaps 20 minutes. Kieran was already moving, Scarlett close behind him. Evangeline's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to follow. The photograph couldn't have been taken more than an hour ago, which meant whoever sent it was still nearby, still watching. They found the children's trail easily enough. Footprints in the soft earth leading toward the wooded path that wound down to the small lake on the property's eastern edge. But halfway down the trail, the footprints were joined by others. Larger prints, moving with purpose. They're not alone, Kieran said grimly. In the distance, a scream echoed through the trees. High-pitched, terrified, unmistakably one of her children. Evangeline ran toward the sound without thinking, crashing through underbrush and low-hanging branches. Behind her, she could hear Kieran shouting orders into his phone, calling for security, for backup, for help that might come too late. She burst into the clearing by the lake to find her children huddled together on the small wooden dock, facing 3 men in dark clothing. The men's attention was focused on River, who was standing protectively in front of his younger siblings despite being only 12 years old. "There's our brave little soldier," one of the men said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "Just like his daddy, always trying to be the hero." "Leave them alone," Evangeline shouted, stepping into the clearing. "Whatever you want. It's with me, not them." The man who'd spoken turned toward her, and she saw a face that would haunt her nightmares. Scarred, weathered, with eyes like chips of black ice. "Mrs. Westbrook, we've been waiting to meet you." "Who are you? What do you want?" "We want what your husband stole from us. And we want what Mr. Ravencrest has been searching for all these years." Kieran emerged from the tree line behind her, and she heard the distinctive sound of a gun being drawn. "Let the children go, Grim." The scarred man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "Kieran Ravencrest. Still playing the protective big brother, I see. Tell me, have you figured it out yet? Have you realized who your precious Dorian really was? I know you took my brother. I know you broke him, changed him, turned him into someone else. What I don't know is why. Because broken things are easier to control," Grim said simply. "Your brother was a useful tool for many years. Pity he developed a conscience in the end." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Dorian hadn't just been Dante Ravencrest. He'd been Dante Ravencrest turned into a weapon, programmed and controlled by the man who now threatened her children. "The money," she said. "The fake job, the false identity. You were using him for something. Corporate espionage, mostly. Your husband had an excellent memory for details and a talent for gaining people's trust. Very useful qualities in certain lines of work. Until he tried to quit," Kieran said. Grim's smile widened. "Until he fell in love and decided to play house with this lovely lady. Love makes people weak, Mr. Ravencrest. It makes them forget their loyalties. So you killed him. Eventually. But not before he told us some very interesting things about what he'd hidden away over the years. Insurance policies, you might say. Evidence of certain activities that some very powerful people would prefer to keep secret." Evangeline's mind raced. Dorian had left something behind, something valuable enough to kill for. Something these people needed badly enough to threaten her children. "I don't know anything about hidden evidence," she said. "Perhaps not. But your children do." The scarred man gestured, and one of his companions moved closer to the dock. River stepped back, pushing his siblings behind him, but there was nowhere left to go. "You see, Mrs. Westbrook, children notice things adults miss. They remember games their father played with them, songs he sang, stories he told. And sometimes, those innocent memories contain very important information." Kieran raised his weapon. "This ends now, Grim." "Does it?" The scarred man pulled out his own gun, aiming it directly at Sage. "I think it's just beginning." The standoff lasted exactly 17 seconds before chaos erupted. Kieran's security team emerged from 3 different positions around the lake, their weapons trained on Grim's men. But Grim had anticipated this. At his subtle hand signal, 2 more figures appeared from the boathouse, dragging a bound and gagged Scarlet between them. "Predictable," Grim said, his gun never wavering from Sage's small form. "You always were too emotionally invested, Kieran. It's what made your brother so easy to break." "Let her go," Kieran commanded, but his voice carried a note of defeat. With Scarlet and the children as human shields, his tactical advantage had evaporated. "I think not. You see, Miss Thornfield discovered something quite interesting in her investigation. Something that changes everything." Grim nodded to one of his men, who pulled a tablet from his jacket and held it up for them to see. The screen displayed a birth certificate. 2 names, 2 dates, 2 babies born 6 minutes apart. But the surname wasn't Ravencrest. Magnus and Dante Grimm. The scarred man announced with obvious satisfaction. "My sons." Evangeline felt the world tilt sideways. "That's impossible." "Is it? Tell me, Mrs. Westbrook, did your husband ever mention feeling claustrophobic in small spaces? Did he have an irrational fear of locked doors? Did he speak in his sleep in languages he claimed not to remember?" Every word hit like a physical blow. Yes, Dorian had exhibited all those behaviors. She'd attributed them to some childhood trauma he refused to discuss. "You see, Dante wasn't kidnapped by strangers," Grimm continued. "He was reclaimed by his real father. A father who'd been forced to give up his sons to a family that could provide them with better opportunities than a poor immigrant could offer." Kieran's face had gone ashen. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why 2 7-year-old boys would be sent to boarding school so young. Ask yourself why your grandmother never spoke of your parents' courtship, their wedding, their early years together. The Ravencrests adopted you, Scarlett said, her words muffled by the gag, but still audible. She'd been working to loosen her bindings while Grimm spoke. Birth records show Magnus and Dante Grimm were placed for adoption when their mother died in childbirth, and then stolen from their adoptive family when the biological father decided he wanted them back, Grimm added. Though I only managed to retrieve one son before the Ravencrests fled with the other. The revelation hit Evangeline like a sledgehammer. Dorian hadn't been kidnapped and brainwashed by criminals. He'd been raised by his biological father, a criminal who'd trained him from childhood to be a tool for illegal activities. The corporate espionage, the false identities, the careful placement in strategic locations, she said, the pieces finally falling into place. You were running him as a long-term asset. For over 20 years, Grimm confirmed. Until he met you and decided he wanted out. Love, as I said, makes people weak. River had been listening intently, his young face pale but determined. Dad wasn't weak, he said suddenly. He was brave. He left you because he loved us more than he feared you. Grimm's attention shifted to the boy, and his smile turned predatory. Ah, the chess player. Tell me, young River, did your father ever teach you any special games? Perhaps involving numbers or codes? Don't answer him, Kieran warned, but River was already shaking his head. Dad said some games were too dangerous to play. But he taught you anyway, didn't he? Children can't resist secrets, especially when they're shared with a beloved parent. Evangeline saw where this was leading and felt sick. What did Dorian hide? Evidence of 20 years' worth of corporate espionage, political blackmail, and financial crimes, Scarlett said, having finally worked her gag loose. Names, dates, bank account numbers, photographs. Enough to bring down half the power structure in the Pacific Northwest. And the location of that evidence is encoded in something he taught the children, Grimm said. A song, perhaps, or a story, maybe a special way of arranging chess pieces. Atlas stepped forward, surprising everyone. At 10 years old, he was quieter than his siblings, more observant. The castle song, he said simply. Atlas, no, Melody hissed, but the boy continued. Dad taught us a song about building castles. He said it was for when we felt scared or lost. It had numbers in it, and letters, and he made us practice it until we could sing it perfectly. Grimm's eyes lit up with triumph. Sing it for me, boy. Like hell. Kieran snarled, taking a step forward. The sound of a gunshot echoed across the lake. Scarlett cried out as blood bloomed across her shoulder, and she collapsed to her knees. The next bullet goes into one of the children, Grimm said calmly. Your choice, Atlas. Sing the song, or watch your sister suffer for your silence. But before Atlas could respond, something unexpected happened. Iris, the 8-year-old who rarely spoke above a whisper, began to sing in a clear, sweet voice. When the castle walls are crumbling down, and the knights have fled the field, find the raven in the crown, where the secret door is sealed. 7 steps to the tower high, 3 more to the treasure deep, where the guardian angels lie. Eternal watch they'll always keep. Grimm listened intently, his scarred face showing fierce concentration. Again he commanded. No, Iris said simply, and fell silent. The song is a code, Scarlett said through gritted teeth, applying pressure to her wounded shoulder. The numbers correspond to locations, probably map coordinates or specific addresses. Clever little Dante, Grimm mused. Always did have a talent for puzzles. 7 steps, 3 more, raven in the crown. I assumed the treasure is hidden somewhere in Ravencrest Manor. Kieran's jaw tightened. You'll never find it. Won't I? I have all the pieces now. The song, the children who know its meaning, and all the time in the world. Grimm gestured to his men. Secure the children. We're leaving. You're not taking them anywhere, Evangeline said, stepping protectively in front of her family. Actually, I am. You see, Mrs. Westbrook, your usefulness to me extends beyond what Dante taught your children. You're going to help me decode his final message because you're the only person who truly understood how his mind worked. I won't help you. You will. Because if you don't, I'll start removing pieces of your children until you change your mind. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Evangeline looked at her children's terrified faces, at Kieran's frustrated rage, at Scarlett bleeding on the ground. Everything Dorian had tried to protect them from was happening anyway. But then River did something that reminded her exactly whose son he was. The 12-year-old suddenly dove sideways off the dock, creating a distraction that lasted just long enough for Kieran's security team to take their shots. The next 30 seconds were a blur of gunfire, shouting, and chaos. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Grimm's men were down, but Grimm himself had vanished into the woods with Sage clutched against his chest as a human shield. "Find him," Kieran roared to his security team, but they all knew it was too late. Mordecai Grimm had what he'd come for, one of her children and the key to finding Dorian's hidden evidence. As sirens wailed in the distance and paramedics worked to stabilize Scarlett's shoulder, Evangeline held her remaining 4 children close and tried to process the devastating truth. Dorian hadn't been the victim of a kidnapping. He'd been the son of a criminal, raised as a weapon, and everything about their life together had been built on lies designed to hide him from the man who now held her youngest son hostage. But there was one truth that cut deeper than all the others. Despite everything, despite the lies and the false identity and the criminal past, Dorian had genuinely loved them. And that love had gotten him killed. Now it was going to get Sage killed too, unless she could figure out how to decode a children's song and find whatever evidence Dorian had hidden before Grimm lost patience and started making good on his threats. The game had changed, but it was far from over. Scarlett insisted on working despite the pain medication, her injured arm in a sling as she hunched over maps spread across Kieran's dining room table. It had been 6 hours since Grimm disappeared with Sage, and the FBI search teams had found nothing but false trails and dead ends. "He's too smart to hide locally," she said, marking locations with red ink. Grimm's had decades to prepare escape routes and safe houses. Evangeline paced behind her, unable to sit still while her youngest son remained missing. The song has to mean something specific. Dorian wouldn't have taught it to them if it wasn't important. 7 steps to the tower high, 3 more to the treasure deep, Kieran recited from memory. If we're talking about this house, the only tower structure is the observatory on the north wing. Have you checked there? First place we looked. Nothing unusual except some old astronomy equipment and dust. River sat quietly in the corner, his chest set arranged in front of him. He'd been moving pieces in the same pattern for the last hour, his young face scrunched in concentration. "River," Evangeline approached her son carefully. "What are you thinking about?" "The way Dad taught me to set up the board," the boy said without looking up. "He always said there was a special opening move that would protect the king no matter what the other player did." Kieran and Scarlett exchanged glances. "Show us," Kieran said. River's fingers moved with practiced precision, arranging the pieces in a configuration that looked random to Evangeline, but clearly meant something to him. "The raven pieces always go here first," he said, positioning 2 black knights in specific squares. "Then the castle, then the guardian angels." "Raven pieces," Scarlett repeated. "Ravens, not knights. Dad called them ravens because of our last name. Said they were special family pieces that would always find their way home." Evangeline's heart clenched. Even in his deception, Dorian had found ways to connect their children to their true heritage. "Where do the ravens go?" River pointed to the board. "Here and here. 7 squares up, 3 squares over." "Coordinates," Kieran breathed. "He's not talking about the physical house. He's talking about the property itself." Scarlett was already pulling up a detailed survey map of the Ravencrest estate on her laptop. "If we treat the main house as the starting point and use the chessboard as a grid reference." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, overlaying a chess grid pattern onto the property map. 7 squares north, 3 squares east from the main house brought them to a section of dense woodland near the property's eastern boundary. "There," she said, pointing at the screen. "About 2 miles through the forest. But there's nothing marked there on any of the official surveys." "Because it predates the official surveys," Kieran said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "When my adoptive grandfather bought this land in 1952, there were already structures on it. Old mining operations from the 1920s. Most of them were sealed up or demolished, but Dorian would have explored every inch of this property," Evangeline finished. "He was always taking the children on hiking expeditions, teaching them about local history. River nodded eagerly. Dad showed us the old mine entrance last summer. Said it was dangerous and we should never go there alone, but he taught us how to find it if we ever got lost in the woods. Scarlett was already gathering her equipment. We need to move now. Every hour we wait gives Grim more time to extract information from Sage. The thought of her 6-year-old son in the hands of that monster made Evangeline's stomach churn, but she forced herself to focus. What if it's a trap? What if Grim is waiting for us to lead him right to whatever Dorian hid? Then we spring the trap on our terms, Kieran said grimly. He was already strapping on tactical gear, transforming from wealthy businessman to something much more dangerous. Harrison, get the emergency protocols in place. If we're not back in 4 hours, contact Agent Morrison at the FBI. The trek through the forest took them past familiar landmarks that Evangeline recognized from family hikes. The twisted oak where Atlas liked to climb. The stream where Iris collected smooth stones. The meadow where they'd had picnics on warm summer afternoons. All those innocent family moments. And Dorian had been using them to teach the children how to navigate to his secret hiding place. They found the mine entrance exactly where River had indicated, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation and a rockfall that looked natural but showed signs of careful arrangement. Kieran's flashlight revealed a narrow tunnel that disappeared into the mountain. Stay close, he warned. These old mines can be unstable. The tunnel ran straight for about 50 yards before opening into a larger chamber that had clearly been modified. Electric lights had been strung along the walls, powered by a small generator that hummed quietly in the corner. The space had been converted into a sophisticated communications center, complete with computers, radio equipment, and filing cabinets that lined 3 walls. My God, Scarlett whispered. This is a complete intelligence operation. Evangeline moved deeper into the chamber, her flashlight beam illuminating stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like surveillance equipment. How long was Dorian working on this? Years, by the look of it, Kieran said, examining a wall covered with maps, photographs, and connecting strings like something from a detective movie. This is everything. Every operation Grim ran, every person he compromised, every crime he committed. But it was what they found in the filing cabinets that truly shocked them. Detailed records of human trafficking operations, political blackmail schemes, and corporate espionage that reached into the highest levels of government and business. Names that Evangeline recognized from newspaper headlines and television news. This could bring down dozens of powerful people, Scarlett said, photographing documents as quickly as she could. No wonder Grim was willing to kill for it. There's something else, Kieran called from the back of the chamber. He'd found a smaller room, almost like a vault, with a heavy steel door that stood slightly ajar. Evangeline, you need to see this. Inside the vault were personal items that made her heart ache. Photographs of her and the children that Dorian must have taken secretly over the years. Letters he'd written but never sent, expressing his love for his family and his guilt over the deception. And in the center of it all, a video camera set up on a tripod. He made recordings, Kieran said, powering up the camera and connecting it to a small monitor. Confessions, maybe. Evidence of what Grim forced him to do. The first video showed Dorian as she'd never seen him, haggard and exhausted, speaking directly to the camera with haunted eyes. If you're watching this, it means something has happened to me. My name isn't Dorian Westbrook. It's Dante Grimm, and my father is one of the most dangerous criminals on the West Coast. Evangeline sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face as Dorian's voice filled the chamber. I was raised to be a weapon, trained from childhood to infiltrate organizations and steal their secrets. But when I met Evangeline, everything changed. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to love someone more than you fear death. The recording continued for nearly an hour, detailing specific operations, naming co-conspirators, and providing evidence that would devastate Grimm's criminal empire. But it was the final minutes that broke Evangeline's heart. I know my father will come for you eventually. He can't let you live with what you know about me. But I've left you the tools to fight back. Use them. Protect our children. And know that every day I spent with you was the first real day of my life. The recording ended, leaving them in stunned silence. Outside, night was falling, and somewhere in the darkness, Mordecai Grimm was holding her son hostage. But now she had what he wanted. The question was whether she could use it to save Sage without destroying everything Dorian had died to protect. "We need to make a trade," she said finally. "The evidence for my son." "Evangeline," Kieran said gently. "He'll kill you both once he has what he wants." "Maybe, but at least the other children will be safe. And you'll have copies of everything." Scarlett looked up from the communications equipment she'd been examining. "There might be another way. This radio can reach frequencies used by law enforcement. If we can coordinate with the FBI." A new voice cut through the chamber, amplified by speakers they hadn't noticed. Grimm's voice, cold and amused. "How touching. A family reunion in the very place where my son betrayed me." They spun around, weapons drawn, but saw only empty tunnel. Grimm was speaking through the communications system, which meant he'd been monitoring their every move. "Did you enjoy Dante's little confession? I must admit, I'm impressed by how thoroughly he documented my business operations. Almost like he was planning to betray me from the very beginning." "Where's my son?" Evangeline demanded. "Safe. For now. But his continued well-being depends on your cooperation. You have something I want, Mrs. Westbrook. And I have something you want. I suggest we arrange an exchange." The radio crackled with static before Sage's voice came through, small and terrified. "Mommy, I want to come home." Evangeline's composure cracked. "Sage, baby, are you hurt?" "I'm scared, Mommy. The bad man says I have to stay here until you bring him something." "I will, sweetheart. Mommy's going to fix this." Grimm's voice returned. "How maternal. You have 1 hour to reach the old lumber mill on Highway 26. Come alone, bring the original files, and perhaps your son will live to see morning." The transmission ended, leaving them with an impossible choice and 57 minutes to make it. The abandoned lumber mill squatted against the mountainside like a sleeping giant, its rusted machinery casting twisted shadows in the moonlight. Evangeline approached the main building with a briefcase containing copies of Dorian's files, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kieran and the FBI tactical team were positioned in the surrounding forest, but she felt utterly alone. The mill's main floor was a maze of conveyor belts and sawing equipment, much of it still operational despite the facility's abandonment. Grimm had chosen well. The noise of the machinery would mask sounds, and the multiple exits provided numerous escape routes. "Punctual," Grimm's voice echoed from the shadows. A quality I always admired in Dante. He emerged from behind a massive circular saw, Sage clutched against his chest. Her son looked unharmed but terrified, his small fingers clutching a toy car that she recognized as his favorite. "Let him go," she called out. "I brought what you wanted." "Did you? Or did you bring carefully edited copies while the originals remained safely hidden?" "The originals are here. Everything Dorian recorded, everything he documented about your operations." Grimm smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Prove it." Evangeline opened the briefcase, showing him the contents. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings. 20 years of evidence. "And the location of my other son?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What? Did you really think I didn't know? Kieran Ravencrest is Magnus, my firstborn. The Ravencrests may have hidden him well, but I never stopped looking for both my boys." From the shadows came the sound of slow applause. Kieran stepped into the light, his weapon trained on Grimm. "Hello, Father. Magnus, you've grown into quite the businessman. Though I suspect you inherited more from me than you'd care to admit." "I inherited nothing from you," Kieran snarled. "You're a monster who destroys everything you touch." "Including your brother?" "Yes. Dante told me about your childhood together before I corrected his loyalties. 7 years old when I reclaimed him. Old enough to remember having a twin, young enough to be molded into something useful." Evangeline saw the trap now. This wasn't just about the evidence. Grimm wanted both his sons, wanted to complete the collection he'd started 28 years ago. "The files for the boy," Grimm said. "Then we discuss terms for your continued cooperation." "There won't be any cooperation," Kieran said. "This ends tonight." "Does it?" Grimm shifted Sage in his arms, and the child whimpered. "Your brother thought he could escape me too. Look how that ended." That's when Evangeline noticed the explosive vest strapped to Grimm's chest, the dead man's switch in his free hand. One released grip and they'd all die in the resulting blast. "Insurance," Grimm explained, seeing her expression. "I've lived long enough. If I can't have my sons alive, I'll settle for taking them with me." But Sage, terrified and confused, did something no one expected. The 6-year-old bit down hard on Grimm's forearm and rolled away, scrambling toward his mother with surprising speed. In the moment of distraction, Kieran fired. The bullet caught Grimm in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. The dead man's switch flew from his grip, skittering across the concrete floor. "Run!" Kieran shouted, diving for the switch as Grimm fumbled for his own weapon. The next 10 seconds lasted an eternity. Evangeline scooped up Sage and sprinted toward the exit as gunfire erupted behind her. She heard Kieran cry out, heard the sound of bodies hitting concrete, heard the ominous electronic beeping that meant the explosive vest was now on a timer. She made it 50 yards from the building before the explosion lit up the night sky. The blast wave knocked her flat, shielding Sage with her body as debris rained down around them. When the ringing in her ears finally subsided, she looked back to see the mill engulfed in flames. "Kieran," she whispered, struggling to her feet. That's when she saw him, silhouetted against the fire, supporting a limping FBI agent as they emerged from the inferno. Grimm was nowhere to be seen, presumably vaporized in the blast that had also destroyed much of the evidence they'd fought so hard to preserve. But not all of it. Scarlett had remained at the mine, copying files and uploading them to secure servers. Grimm's criminal empire might survive his death, but it would never again operate in the shadows. Later, as paramedics checked Sage for injuries and FBI agents secured the scene, Evangeline found herself sitting beside Kieran on the back of an ambulance. His left arm was in a sling, and his face bore several cuts from flying debris, but he was alive. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "The immediate threat, yes. But there will be trials, investigations, people seeking revenge for what we've exposed. So we're still in danger." Kieran turned to look at her, and in his gray eyes she saw something she'd never expected. "Hope. We," he said quietly. "Not you and the children. We." The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and promise. They'd been thrown together by circumstance, bound by tragedy and deception. But somewhere in the chaos of the last week, something real had grown between them. "The children need stability," she said. "They've been through too much. They'll have it. All of them. For as long as they want it." Sage ran toward them, having escaped the paramedic's attention. He launched himself into Evangeline's arms, and she held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair and feeling his small heart beat against her chest. "Is the bad man gone, Mommy?" "Yes, baby. He's gone." "Good. Can we go home now?" Evangeline looked at Kieran, at the mansion visible in the distance, at her other children huddled together by the FBI command vehicle. Home. For the first time since Dorian's death, the word felt possible again. "Yes," she said softly. "We can go home." 6 months later, Ravencrest Manor buzzed with controlled chaos as wedding preparations reached their final stages. Evangeline stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple but elegant ivory dress she'd chosen for the ceremony. The woman staring back at her looked different from the desperate mother who'd stood on an auction platform what felt like a lifetime ago. "You look beautiful, Mom," Melody said from the doorway, carrying a bouquet of white roses mixed with mountain wildflowers. At 15, she'd grown into the role of eldest sister with grace, helping to keep her younger siblings grounded through all the changes. "Are you sure about this?" Evangeline asked, not for the first time. "It's happening so fast. Mom, you've been living here for 6 months. You're already a family. The wedding is just making it official." Through the window, she could see the garden where workers were arranging chairs for the ceremony. A small gathering, just close friends and the handful of relatives who'd survived the FBI's investigation into Grimm's network. Scarlett would be there, her arm fully healed, along with Harrison and the household staff who'd become surrogate grandparents to the children. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Kieran stood in the doorway, handsome in his dark suit, his gray eyes warm with affection. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony," Melody protested. "I needed to give her something," Kieran said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Something that belongs to our family." Inside was a ring unlike anything Evangeline had ever seen. Antique gold set with a deep blue sapphire, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. "It was my adoptive grandmother's," he explained, slipping it onto her finger beside the simple gold band they'd chosen together. "She would have wanted you to have it." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Kieran, it's beautiful." "There's something else," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The investigators found something in Grimm's files. Information about what really happened to Dante." Evangeline's heart clenched. Even now, 6 months later, talking about Dorian still brought a mixture of love and pain. What kind of information? "He's alive." The words hit her like a thunderbolt. What? The real Dante Ravencrest. Grimm kept him alive all these years, held him prisoner in a facility outside Seattle. The FBI found him 3 days ago. Evangeline sank into a chair, her mind reeling. But Dorian was Magnus Grimm, Grimm's biological son, raised to believe he was Dante. The DNA test confirmed it. Grimm switched their identities when Magnus was old enough to be useful, kept the real Dante as leverage in case Magnus ever tried to escape. The revelation shattered everything she thought she understood about her late husband. So the man I married, the father of my children, was never Dante Ravencrest. But that doesn't make what you shared any less real. Magnus chose to love you, chose to be a father to your children, chose to risk everything to protect you from his real father. River appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Mom, is it true? Is Uncle Dante really alive?" Word traveled fast in a house full of children. Soon all 4 of her remaining children had gathered, their faces filled with confusion and hope. "He's alive," Kieran confirmed gently, "but he's been through terrible things. 28 years of captivity have left him damaged. He may never fully recover." "Can we see him?" Iris asked in her quiet voice. "Eventually. The doctors say he needs time to adjust. He doesn't remember much about his life before the kidnapping, and the real world frightens him. But he's safe now." Atlas, ever practical, asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "Does this change anything?" "About us being a family." Kieran knelt down so he was at eye level with the children. "Nothing changes. You're my children now, in every way that matters. The adoption papers are final, and after today, your mother will be my wife. We're a family." An hour later, Evangeline walked down the garden path toward the small altar they'd set up beneath an ancient oak tree. Her children walked beside her, each carrying a single flower to add to the unity bouquet. It wasn't traditional, but nothing about their family had ever been traditional. Kieran waited for her at the altar, his face radiant with happiness. As she took his hand, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, the auction that had felt like the end of everything, the secrets and lies that had nearly destroyed them, the violence that had almost torn them apart, but also the love that had grown between them, unexpected and powerful. The way he'd protected her children as if they were his own. The way he'd given them a home, not just a house, but a place where they belonged. "Do you, Evangeline, take Kieran to be your husband?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Do you, Kieran, take Evangeline to be your wife?" "I do," he replied, sliding the wedding band onto her finger beside his grandmother's ring. When they kissed, sealing their union, the children cheered. In the distance, she could see Harrison wiping his eyes with a handkerchief and Scarlett taking photographs to preserve the moment. Later, as the reception wound down and the children played in the garden, Kieran pulled her aside. "I have one more surprise," he said, leading her to a quiet corner of the garden where a small bronze plaque had been installed beside a newly planted rose bush. The plaque read, "In memory of Magnus Grimm, who chose love over loyalty and gave his life protecting what mattered most." "I wanted the children to have a place to remember their father," Kieran explained. "Not the lies or the deception, but the man who loved them enough to die for them." Evangeline traced the letters with her finger, tears streaming down her face. "He would have liked this." "I hope so." As they stood together in the fading light, Evangeline felt a deep sense of completion. The past would always be part of them, with all its pain and complexity. But the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. "Mrs. Ravencrest," Kieran said softly, testing out her new name. "Mr. Ravencrest," she replied, laughing through her tears. "I love you. I love you too." And under the stars of an Oregon sky, surrounded by the laughter of their children and the promise of tomorrow, they began the rest of their lives together.